Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. This video is about the Fox News worldview and the military-industrial complex in general, how this feeds into electoral politics. I'm not sure if I'll get that far, but here we go. I've got an awful lot to say. So it was richly ironic that Fox News used to have fair and balanced as its motto, when of course it's unfair and unbalanced, almost mentally unbalanced. They had such a nerve to use that as their motto. So you look at the hosts, how Sean Hannity is no more than a publicist for Donald Trump, supposed to be reporting at a Trump rally a couple of months ago and then started campaigning for Trump. So Trump calls into Fox News shows and rants down the phone for a long time because he knows he'll get a very sympathetic hearing. They never ask him a worthwhile question, nothing challenging, nothing, never put him on the spot, always be a P-roller. So he likes these softball questions. And then, well, what's Fox News really about? It's about being hyper-chauvinistic, about being white nationalist, about being free market fundamentalist, except, of course, for corporations who've got to get lots of money from the government and huge tax breaks, sweetheart deals. So it's almost anti-analytical, this channel. You look at some of the other major contributors like Judge Jeanine Pirro. Isn't it unseemly for a judge, I mean, even a former judge, to be so highly partisan? Well, obviously not in the United States. It's considered acceptable. Having said that, I can't think of any Democrats who are former judges who are doing this sort of thing. Anyway, Judge Pirro said that hijabs are un-American. Well, her words are, hijab is from Sharia, the antithesis of the US Constitution. Now, well, the US Constitution obviously doesn't forbid the Sharia or forbid any religion. They're all permitted. But there are certain similarities. Well, certainly in the early days, and they're always going back to the Founding Fathers, Fox News, when slavery was not forbidden by the Constitution. Of course, humans were counted as property. The Constitution didn't outlaw plural marriage, and the Constitution obviously allowed the invasion of Native American homelands, their subjugation, and the sequestration of their property. So property rights were sacred, well, for whites, not for others. Corporal punishment obviously wasn't prohibited, including of adults. Execution is still not banned. So there are certain similarities between the two. And I know that the US Constitution has at least moved forward, and there were no women's rights as such in the Constitution to begin with. I know Sharia has got some. Now, I know obviously things have changed for the United States, and there's gender equality these days. But to begin with, women usually didn't have property rights in the United States. They got married, their husband owned all the property. Now, gradually, various state legislatures and courts introduced that. So in a sense, Sharia was actually ahead of the US Constitution in the early days. And the US government has actively supported various Sharia states around the world. Dick Cheney talking about friends and allies in Saudi Arabia. President Trump gushes about how he adores the Saudi Arabian regime because they give him money. That's it in his own terms. He spelt it out. The US had Pakistan for decades, giving them military aid, favouring them over India, a secular democracy. The US has got very good relations with the UAE, which is somewhat a Sharia state, with Qatar, that's got a big military base there, with Egypt, which is not exactly a Sharia state, but still, for example, a woman is facing jail there for wearing a dress that revealed her legs. Another lady went on television eating a banana suggestively, and she said that having a child outside wedlock is not unthinkable. She's in prison for that. Anyway, arming lots of Sharia states, and in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, and I could go on and on and on. People who are really trying to promote the Sharia as the law of the land. Particularly Judge Pirro's Republican Party. So it's the height of hypocrisy to then rail against Sharia, when, of course, you opposed secular Muslims elsewhere. So once upon a time, people would have said that Jews and Catholics couldn't be proper Americans. Think of the know-nothings. And Judge Pirro, her ancestry is Lebanese. Of course, people would have said, oh, these Arabs, they can't possibly be, Americans, even Christian Arabs. And I'm sure a lot of her ignorant supporters have no idea that not all Arabs are Muslims. So we're all products of our environment, our circumstances, and wearing clothes is that. Part of that can be part of somebody's culture. So it's disgustingly bigoted to say that this woman shouldn't wear this thing on her head. What if she covered her head another way? Wear a baseball cap, would that be okay? The effect would be the same. So there's this fascinating interaction of race, of religion, of constitutionalism in what Judge Pirro said. So it's difficult to counter her because of her ignorance of Islam. And look at Laura Ingraham, or Laura Ingram, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, saying that detention centres are like summer camps. Well, I pity her children. Would she really want her children to be in there? Now, I know the conditions in these detention centres may not be as horrific as some have claimed, but I don't think they're doing lots of fun activities. There's not such a huge amount spent per child. Often they couldn't contact their parents. Their parents couldn't even find out where they are. It's a story that's died. People have got bored and the media narrative has moved on because the public's got an attention span of about 2 weeks. So there we are. And it's funny how all these family values, women, some of them, let's say, Laura Ingraham and Ann Coulter, you must marry, have children, otherwise you're a failure. They haven't managed to marry or have children. Practice what you preach. I know Laura Ingraham has adopted children from outside the United States. She could have adopted American children. I have no objection to adopting children from abroad, but then don't go and say that immigration is a disaster. Charity starts at home. You could have adopted an American child. I see nothing wrong with adopting a child from abroad, especially if you're helping them out of a situation where they would have been worse off in a country which is less economically developed. Anyway, Tucker Carlson, saying that Iraqis are monkeys some years ago, flagrantly racist trope. Some people are saying Americans are stupid, which is a bigoted and unpleasant thing to say. But obviously Carlson doesn't object, indeed says it himself, spreads this bile against people of other nationalities, saying that Iraqis should obey. Well, the liberation of Iraq, which I supported and still do, was about Iraqis determining their own future, not treating them as a subject people, and saying that Iraqis do not use lavatory paper or forks. I wonder if Mr. Carlson's ever met an Iraqi. I mean, I've had lunch with a number of Iraqis, and yes, they have all used forks. As for their lavatorial habits, I don't inquire. I don't know where we got that idea. But it's true that certainly in the old days, in many parts of the Arab world, lavatory paper was not available, so they had to use water. I mean, what would people have used in the United States a very long time ago? So there's this ideological concept which pervades Fox News, discourse about Americans being the master race, though they don't actually spell it out that honestly. There are a few decent people on Fox News. There used to be Coombs, who's died since. They're token liberal, to show a bit of the so-called balance. And Chris Wallace, he asks some challenging questions. He's a journalist worth the name, questioning the president and so on in a tough manner. But there's this notion that the mistreatment of other nationalities and of non-whites is laudable. So it's about hyper-aggression from Fox News, about dehumanizing other people. It's about justifying cruelty and depriving people of rights. So it's obvious that ethnicity is a central factor in so much of this. They take aim at Black Lives Matter. It should be uncontroversial. Of course black people's lives matter. Now, I know everyone's life matters, but you see the number of black people are shot dead by the police. I know you could go into a more in-depth statistical analysis and say, well, the black community is on the whole younger than whites, and people who are younger tend to be shot dead more than people who are older. And you have to look at the situations in which black people encounter the police and blah, blah, blah. But even taking into that all account, there's a disproportionate number of black people are shot dead by the police. Or rather, nobody was shot by the police. Now, I realise there's situations where the police are obliged to shoot, but there have been quite a few situations where they've killed black people without any reason, sometimes with some sort of reason, it's not a sufficient reason. We shot him because he had a gun. He has the right to have a gun, as Fox News presenters would be the first to tell us. So Fox News is constantly lambasting immigrants, both legal and illegal, sometimes not distinguishing between the two. I mean, obviously, these whites, they could go back to Europe, but, that was different in the old days. So it's nefarious to do this. Anyway, so it's not just the capital-owning class that watches Fox. The people who are very much not part of the property class, there are many proletarians who watch it. But it appears that some people are incapable of developing their faculties, their cognitive faculties, to such a point where they can perceive that Fox News is all about scaring the poor into attacking other poor people and then letting the exploiters off the hook. So who are the exploiters? Well, there'll be some corporations, there'll be some business owners. I'm not saying they're all like that. But if you're going to pay as little as you can get away with and charge as much as you can get away with and then try and get tax breaks and blah, 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 that would be exploitation. I mean, what else would it be? It was the same being against having a minimum wage. If the word exploitation doesn't even exist, if the concept doesn't even exist, if there can be no such thing, that's what some of the Fox News people appear to believe. Because, yes, obviously you need to make a healthy profit, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact we're dealing with people here. We shouldn't try and drive the weak to the wall and give them poverty pay. I was reading only yesterday about how insulin is so expensive and people are born with diabetes, often can't afford it, have to skip insulin sometimes, and they die as a result. And it would be just so easy to solve. You could have price controls, you could have state governments, the federal government providing it for free, or at least subsidizing it. It's about a quarter of the price in Canada. It's not like Canada's a totalitarian state just because they make sure that their diabetics do not die avoidably. What are governments for? Governments for to serve the people, to help people when they need it, to reduce suffering. And these are people who are born with it. There's type 2 diabetes, which you can acquire. You might say, oh, that's a lifestyle thing. Even so, I would try and alleviate their suffering. So Fox News appears to believe that by allowing more immigrants into the United States, the country would be sowing the seeds of its own destruction. It's staggering to think that the United States has admitted hundreds of millions of immigrants legally, but the next 1,000 would just be the end of the world. That would be the caravan. I wonder when the next caravan's going to appear. I'm sure one will appear right on cue, just when Trump needs it during his re-election campaign. So the transfer of power from whites to non-whites is already inescapable, as whites are going to be a minority in perhaps 30 years. Still a plurality, though. So Fox News, they play on white anxiety. They ruthlessly exploit this blue-collar worry about automation. Because just think, in 20 years, there'll be scarcely any bus drivers, taxi drivers, factory workers, even retail staff will largely lose their jobs. So the unevenness of economic growth is something that Fox News never inquires about. That why is it the 1% have seen their wealth growing rapidly for decades? That, say, the middle class have sunk back a bit, the working class has got appreciably worse. But the 70s was the best time for the American working class. If you had a permanent job, you could occasionally afford a few luxuries. The healthcare was not prohibitively expensive. So it's a lie of admission not to examine that issue. So America is not a tottering structure, as Fox News would have us believe. I mean, they try to create this sense of crisis, just sensationalize everything to make it more compelling viewing. And the United States will not perish from more Hispanics coming in, any more than, say, New Mexico, Nevada, and California did from more whites coming into what was already mainly Hispanic territory. So prior to 2016, Fox News suppressed negative stories about Trump. Now, okay, they are one-sided. Fair enough, I don't object to that. You could advance an agenda, but then don't pretend to be even-handed when you're not. And I don't say, oh, the liberal media, CNN and MSNBC. I can't think of how they are, actually. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I can't think of bad stories about the Democrats or Hillary Clinton that they buried. And it's true that they criticize Trump a lot, but there's so much to criticize. They do point out the good news about the stock market being quite high. So Fox News exhibits this great fascination with war, with terrorism, with crime, but never with healthcare, education, or the environment. It's violence, I suppose, is because it's so much more dramatic. That's why they like it. And they suggest that colleges are far-left madrasas. In fairness, that's sometimes true. Now, it's true that academics tend to be left-wing, but one could still be even-handed and present things in an unbiased manner and say, well, a left-winger would say this, a right-winger would say this, a centrist would say this, and just leave students to make up their own mind. So I don't think there's that much indoctrination at colleges. I could be wrong. And there is a troubling trend of free speech being shut down in academia, not just in the United States, but throughout the Western world. So Fox News are onto something when they say that, although they're not exactly tolerant of things they don't like either, like people disrespecting Old Glory. So the working class in the United States and much of the Western world is increasingly frustrated, impatient, discontented, almost hopeless, as they see wage compression, as they see job insecurity looming, if it's not there already. And Trump, he channeled their rage, he expressed this, and he's fantastic at sloganizing in his orations. Obviously, there are no well thought through policies, and Fox News would never scrutinize his policy pronouncements. Does this add up? Is it a menu with prices? You're going to do this. How much is it going to cost? How are you going to source the money? And just deciding that they will believe Mexico will pay for it. So hypercapitalism lacks widespread support, which is why Fox News and the Republican Party, they latch on to God, guns and gays, railing about the dangers of terrorism, of immigration, almost as though they're the same thing, and how the Democrats would try and take away your big cars, or how climate change is a hoax, we shouldn't give a damn about the environment. So always confining the limits of blame to the other, never to white, certainly not to rich white males. So it's a highly convenient rationalization of some people's instinctive desire to detest others. Obviously, it doesn't exist just in the United States. I'm not suggesting that most Americans feel like this. After all, Trump only got 46% of the vote, and not all of them would be haters. There would be some policy reasons. He might be pro-life or pro-gun, but perhaps foolish enough to believe that Trump actually sincerely believed in any of that, when he's often contradicted himself on these issues. And pseudo-scientific arguments are advanced to suggest that there is no climate change. There's this categorical denial of climate change from Fox News, so far as I can see, from Republican politicians such as Senator Cruz. And they're all about a yearning for more money, fair enough, and greater security, but never doing the blatantly obvious things like reducing access to firearms, which would increase security. There's a fear of being déclassé that Fox News and the Republican Party capitalized on. I was reading the long telegram by George F. Kennedy the other day. It's 1946, that US diplomat at Moscow, analyzing Soviet foreign policy. And in some ways, it seems strangely redolent of the situation in the United States now. In other respects, of course, the Soviet Union in 1946 was radically different from that. But this idea that there's a zero-sum game, there's a struggle to achieve global paramountcy, and so on. So perhaps some of the working class admire Trump for cutting corners, for cheating. And he's unrefined. His lack of culture perhaps appeals to them. He doesn't talk down to them. He's not an ivory tower intellectual. Even though he's super rich, he somehow doesn't come across as a snob. So all that education had absolutely zero effect on him. Could talk another time about his education, how he managed to get into some of the most illustrious universities in the United States, despite being a man who appears never to have read a book and being perhaps functionally illiterate. So it's small wonder that many working class whites put their faith in this brash New Yorker, because of the soundness of his uncompromising views on Mexicans and Muslims. They give them somebody to hate. Used to be said about the British public, they love a good hate. So Trump was congenial to their emotions and their impulses, a feeling of supremacy. Now, their sincerity should not be impugned. Much that you might find such views distasteful, they are heartfelt. So there are urges as old as humanity itself, such as to think that my people are the best, and that we're always virtuous, and the others are wicked, and that's that. We should circle the ox wagons. But I would like us to grow up, to be more civilized. And people fell for Trump's imposture. So people have this almost limitless capacity to see themselves. Even sagacious people can do that. And it wasn't just self-delusion. And Trump is very self-deluding. There's voluntary fraud. People at some level must know that he's deceiving them. And now, conscience should not slumber in us. We should see how he is stoking hatred at other people, and words lead to actions, like that synagogue shooting some months ago. But some people are willing to just switch off their conscience when it comes to certain issues, when it comes to causing suffering to others. So I suppose Trumpism is less centered on economics than status, because he doesn't have well thought through economic policies. I don't think as economic experts are saying, yeah, this is a wise idea. So it comes on to the MAGA agenda, which is perilously close to racism. There's that slippery slope, and that illegal immigrants are bad, that all immigrants are bad, that even people of certain recent immigrant stock are bad. And, and what is an immigrant to the United States? After 5 years, he or she is a citizen in many cases. So perpetuating racist animus is detestable. You'd think racism would be dying down as we become a globalized world, as more and more people speak English. So we move around, we meet each other, we see that other people are not ogres. But there's this vague spot as to who is white enough. How about white Hispanics? Are they white enough? Well, perhaps Ted Cruz seems to be white enough. Anyway, I could go on all day, but I've got to leave it there about the Fox News worldview. I shall carry on later.